Morning and welcome to this special webinar on responsible AI governance in government agencies. Thank you for all of you who signed up and are joining us live. Um, the comment box is open, the chat box is open. Please let us know where you're calling in from. And as you have questions as we go along with this webinar, please put them in the chat box so we can respond to them. And periodically, we will be putting up some QR codes for you to download some free resources around this topic. And it's very, very informative and will help you think through how you want to deploy AI in your organization in 2026 and beyond. So with me, I have Robert Karnovich. He is the Principal Strategic Advice Initiatives at Avero Advisors. Robert, welcome.
Hey, good morning.
And let's talk about why this topic is important before we dive in. Last couple of years have been a sort of a whirlwind in terms of AI adoption, ChatGPT. Everyone's using it to run their lives better. But on the enterprise side, especially in local government, it's somewhat of a black hole because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of players. There's a lot of options available to our uh, clientele. But the problem is there is a gap between the aspiration and the execution, and it exists because governments by design are not supposed to be on the bleeding edge, but at the same time, AI is sort of accelerating that push for digital modernization, and it's not always practical for any agency to just jump in and buy something AI, and that's our stance, where we're constantly recommending that you don't just go buy product. So where do you begin? How do you start on your AI journey? And that is that is the topic of discussion here. Uh, hey Jennifer, good to see you. Thanks for joining. So let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen, and we will try to keep it entertaining and not boring. Uh, so again, thanks for joining us. We're talking about responsible AI governance in government. How do you even think about deploying AI? Where do you begin? How do you think about data? Who does what? There's a lot of things to think about to make sure that you are mature enough to take advantage of these massive opportunities for scale, for automation, just to do more with less. We've been saying that for a long, long time, but this is the real opportunity. But you can get it wrong if you don't think through how you're going to do this. Um, any opening remarks, Robert? What's on your mind this morning?
I think there seems to be a pretty good gap to your point where those who are sort of in the know, and again, the point is there's not one person that knows everything about the current state of AI. That's how fast it evolves. There are a lot of folks in local gov that are not even thinking of the same things that you and I worry about, which is how are you going to keep governance to stay up to speed with the evolution of AI, but deal with the fact that we're talking about government. Government inherently has a lot of checks and balances and moves at a slower pace and has red tape. And I think there's a real danger for anyone, no matter how sophisticated you think you are, of allowing your AI governance to bog down so that everything overruns you. Because as we'll talk about in here, your end users are going to keep using AI, whether you set a policy or not, whether you try and
Hmm.
control the data or not. And this requires the level of agility and tactical thinking that is very difficult to do in leadership positions in government because you report to a governing body that only meets every 2 weeks or maybe once every 4 weeks. I think that's going to be the biggest takeaway today is how are you going to possibly keep yourself current with what's going on in AI without just throwing in the towel one day and going, this is just impossible to try and manage.
Yeah, and I think the point of this discussion too is making the point it is not impossible to manage. There's a methodology that isn't very different from overhauling major systems, right? It's being marketed to us and our clients as a magic box that just does the thing for you. But we've seen failures, we've seen stumbles on those pilots that didn't quite think through governance, readiness, security, controls, training, and change management. Believe it or not, that is a huge aspect because you're going to impact people's work lives through this. And I'm not just talking about replacing people because that is the wrong move to wrong lens to look at this through, but you need to consider all of these things. It's treat this as an implementation of an ERP system or anything that's large scale that impacts the whole organization. So, what we're hoping you take away from this today is our stance at building governance first. It is the most critical aspect to do here. And that includes data hygiene, data strategy, decision frameworks before you buy any product. And we've seen this being the stumbling block, meaning this is where people don't know where to exactly begin. And a lot of times these items are on people's radar. They have been on the strategy. They have been on the CIO's radar for a long, long time. Yeah, we need to do something with that data. Yeah, we just moved to a new system. We still have legacy data in our older system. Um, and so the project itself, that project itself needs to happen regardless of AI or not, right? So thinking about AI as or AI deployment as something that happens after you've cleaned house is the right framework to look at. The other thing is uh, NIST security frameworks. NIST just came out with, they've had 22 standards. Now they have AI standards you need to apply on top of that. So, how do you look at uh, security and manage AI systems in your organization without compromising your overall security stance? That's important. And then implementing controls, rights-based guardrails to enforce procurement or operational requirements, because a lot of these AI tools are below thresholds. People can just put them on P cards. And next thing you know, if it breaks or something goes wrong, it's the IT help desk that's getting the call without knowing that someone bought this thing. So, shadow systems, that problem has existed forever. I think it's about to get worse for um, help desk managing those things if you're not careful on setting this up right the first time. Um,
Yeah, there's a
Go ahead.
social engineering aspect to this as well, which is very typical for people in IT to understand, but others might not be conscious of it. The first time you go to use the product and it doesn't work as corrected, or it gives you erroneous results, or it gets you in trouble. Let's say you try and make a policy decision or policy interpretation using an AI tool and it's the wrong call. You will not go back to that tool. You will have an inherent negativity bias towards that. And so that's the other part too, which is, I look at it, it's trust. Who are you going to ultimately trust? The vendor who's trying to sell you an AI product? Are you going to trust the public who's telling you what they need? Are you going to trust yourself? Are you going to trust your governance? That's what we're going to get into here, which is going to be ultimately key, because again, once someone uses that tool and doesn't get the results they want, they're not going to come back to it, or they're going to go grab another tool and use
Yeah.
that instead of the one that is actually controlled and mandated by your governance for good reasons.
Yeah, and to that point, it's really easy to say that it didn't work. Like we've had several conversations. We have Copilot, it doesn't work. But that's not the point. It doesn't work because you haven't given it access to data. You haven't trained it. You haven't told it what kind of behaviors you want out of it in what situations. You talk about we've been talking about business process redesign for decades now, and that is it's applicable to AI deployments. It's more applicable now because you want to tell the AI how to run your business processes and sometimes get ideas on how AI would do it better. Like, there's so many great examples, but so why is buying AI different from governing AI? Because products, we've seen this, products don't create accountability, governance does, right? This is we're finding this the hard way as we're deploying our own AI tools. Uh, as savvy as we are with technology, it all comes down to data hygiene, processes, and it's forcing us to make those decisions because we want those automations, we want that efficiency. And when you try to implement a simple agent that does tedious manual labor, it's hitting roadblocks because it doesn't have the right information. It doesn't have the right um, uh, workflows. You haven't told it what to do yet. So what are the foundations that come first? Uh, Data hygiene. Again, I'm gonna cry myself hoarse talking about this because it doesn't get taken seriously enough anyway. And in the AI age, if you want to do anything with AI based tools, you can't have bad data. So Talk to me a little bit about what your take on that is.
Yeah, there's two things that come to mind with this, and this is one of the biggest risks of not even tackling your governance is people will also shop around if they don't get the result they like in this system. They will. We see it all the time. I tried it in Copilot. I tried it in Gemini. I got two different results. I like Gemini better. So then you wind up going back to that. There's always the concern, especially when you're using your own data, and this applies to ERP projects as well, that you don't know what state it's in. I think that's the biggest thing. Most people don't know what the state of their data is in, so they can't even ask the question as to how reliable and how useful. But there's also the old rule of, don't mistake available data for being accurate and the correct data. And people will lose that mindset of thinking, oh, this thing can generate massive amounts of data or summarize massive amounts of data to me in such a quick fashion. It must be correct, right? And never look at the fact of what's the state of the data that you bring in. And we see this in ERP projects all the time. People don't want to spend the money and they don't want to spend the time. So they're just like, just import it all and then we'll figure it out later, which is just, it never works in any of these systems.
Yeah. And Joe, I'm going to take your question. Thanks for joining, by the way. Who has time to train AI? Knowing Joe, he's probably chuckling right now, but you're right. But I think training AI is maybe the wrong framing. I may have used the wrong frame there, because what are you actually training? You're not training the LLMs that you're going to use in the back end, because there's hundreds of models you can use to automate something. And that's also the fallacy about talking about AI products. The product itself is not AI. The product is AI enabled, right? Anything you buy or build, you're going to build a chatbot that sits on your website or on your customer service portal. It's still software. Somebody put it together. Maybe an AI bot put that software piece together, but there's an AI portion to it that is being trained by the large language model owners, OpenAI, Grok, Gemini, you name it. What you're doing when you're deploying it is you're training the workflow. You're setting the workflow, you're configuring it, giving it access to your data sources. You are uh, training the behavior you want from this deployment that is using a large language model. And these things are very sophisticated, right? As we are deploying our own automations, I'm learning so much about how capable they are, but they're also very scatterbrained if you don't give it the right guardrails and teaching. So the human element, the teaching element, the configuring, the workflow planning is extremely important. So Joe, we have to make the time to do that piece to make sure that whatever product that is AI enabled is going to work for you the way you want it to. So, I mean, that brings me to point two, is strategy alignment, right? This is not different from anything else we've talked about. How do you modernize your operations digitally without having a clear strategy on what your organization, your department wants to do? And this has been true for large scale software deployments or infrastructure upgrades. You have to think about what the business case is. Why are we doing this? What the ROI is going to be, what the efficiencies are going to be, and then make that alignment with strategy. And if you don't have clear use cases, you don't have the outcomes. And we're seeing this play out in AI pilots that are solutions looking for problems, right? You go to a conference, you sign up for some pilot, and it's installed on your environment. And then the question is, okay, this is cool, but what is it really going to do for us? So the next thing is starting with, governance, data hygiene, but you have to really think about what are the use cases within my workflow that could use automation. And then that automation could use an AI element to make it go faster, become more intelligent, and become more efficient. So, yeah, go ahead.
The one of the great things about the NIST framework is the fact that it speaks enterprise risk language. And I think this is where a lot of people miss out on this. They look at AI solutions as possibly being, incredibly cheap and affordable in comparison to what they've done in other areas. The risk you take on, even though the product itself might require low financial investment and resource investment, the risk you take on is massive. And so you have to have this mindset of treating solutioning like this, just like you would as a major capital investment into a system replacement. It might not be the financial aspect, but it certainly is a massive risk that has to be contained and thought about. Hence the reason why you need to build proper governance for managing that risk correctly.
Yeah, and there's no rush, right? There's this uh, again, this is a marketing race more than it is a technology race. Who's going to get the eyeballs and the leads first? So this urgency that's being created about, oh, you're going to get left behind. AI is going to eat your job. It's not there. It's nowhere close to replacing masses of workers that are doing great work today, right? But at some point, it will maybe get there. There's a lot of work to be done. If you're even going to replace one FTE, it's just not there yet. Jennifer is asking a question. Is that training or configuration? I think it's more configuration. Uh, you can consider it training, right? Because you want to think of AI agent, agentic workforce as a workforce. And through that lens, you should be training if you're considering them a robotic employee. It's training, but to a machine, it's configuration plus giving instructions. And I can in one of these sessions, I'll do a deep dive. I've been trying to deploy OpenClaw over the last week or so, and it needs constant reminders. And maybe I haven't set it up right yet, right? But you have to be really minute about how you're setting this up so that the agent remembers what happened yesterday, 2 days ago. So you have to give it instructions to, hey, every day 15 minutes, every 15 minutes, refresh your memory or something like that. So it is training, but it's not training in the sense that you would train a human being. So it's still in the realm of configuration to me, but it's still a lot of work to do. Thank you for that question. Um, so next is governance framework, decision rights and risk control. This becomes fuzzy at times, right? What framework, what decision rights, and how are you going to control the risk? And when you think of risk, the first thing you go to is an AI agent going to run amok, within our data systems and create a mess, put out PII, um, do stuff, and we've seen stories where that has happened, but that has happened because you haven't got the control set up. Because when you deploy anything AI, you must make sure that you're deploying it in a really controlled, walled off environment to make sure it's going to behave properly. And the downside of it being intelligent is that it can make decisions on its own, unless, again, in your training configuration, you haven't given it super micro and minute instructions on how to treat edge cases, because hallucination is real
Yeah,
and it can happen. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
yeah, it needs to be transparency. I think that's the other thing people will miss out on is just you operate in the realm of public trust, and there's a lot of scrutiny that comes with the decision making within that realm of public trust. And to let AI run amok without an ability for you to provide transparency to what you're doing is going to put you in a real PR pickle awfully quick. It's probably also going to cost you the long-term use of the product as well. Because like I said, the first time someone uses something and there's a negative reaction to their use of it, especially in a public forum, they're not going to return to that, or they're going to scrap the whole entire thing. So always important for our local glove folks to remember that you're operating in the realm of public trust. There's a high degree of transparency that's expected. And so that has to be in your mind at all times when doing governance and planning these solutions
Yeah.
out.
And we'll talk more about what governance means, because it means a lot of different things to different people. There's a IT definition, there's an organizational design definition, but how does all of that apply to AI? We'll talk about that. And management capability, right? You need to have the ability to monitor whatever agents you put in place, even if it's a third party SaaS product. It's living in your environment, consuming your data. You need to be able to monitor what's going on, and at the lowest level, make sure that it's staying up, that it's got the API still working, it's got the gateway still working, uh, because you don't want to lose trust too, right? Once you deploy these tools, as soon as people say it doesn't work, why would I bother using it? And here goes your $1 million investment down the drain, because you haven't released something that consistently works because you haven't done the little things. So we'll talk about that too. So these are, to us, these are the four major pillars: data hygiene, strategic alignment, governance, and capability internally to manage an agentic workforce. Again, yes, agents can manage themselves and manage sub agents, but you need the humans to uh, be the guardians of your environment and your data and your organization. So that brings me to the innovation governance gap. Uh, I mean, any conference we go to, any webinar we attend, people are talking about how great these products are, what they can do for governments. Here's all the use cases you can solve. But there's a gap, right? You can't get there unless you do these things, which are, again, they're that it's boring stuff to most people. It's non-priority, um, and that creates the gap. If you haven't done that, the heavy lifting up front, you're not going to get to the automation. What's your take on this?
Yeah, it does. So many products don't move the needle. Either ones that um, people tried to explore on their own, but even just recently in a couple of conferences, looking at what vendors are providing. And again, you can pull a lot of data together and you can present it quickly. And the question after that becomes, well, what's next? And usually there's
Hmm.
nothing there. It's pretty easy for someone to come in and just take all your existing data and your systems, integrate them, and then show you a way to dashboard quicker. But then the question always becomes, well, what's next? How can I practically apply that? Almost like a flash in the plant and in the pan. That was interesting to see once. Now it's going to make it sustainable. And I think that's where a lot of these solutions are falling short. We're seeing vendors try and tackle the procurement process in local gov. And the way they keep failing is it is not just a compilation of data and scoring. There are so many factors that go into procurement and the unique way that organizations do procurement from county to county or city to city. You're not capturing that part of the process as well. And when you don't, then the tool becomes either very niche for only one particular area, pulling scoring together or doing a first pass on proposals, but it doesn't provide any wider solution to the process, nor does it actually speed it up in a useful way. So that's why these solutions are falling short. They're tackling the low hanging fruit, and then everyone's going, well, what's next? What can I
Yeah.
really leverage this for? How is this really going to solve service
How does it
delivery?
scale? And it's, you bring up a good point, because scaling requires another implementation. It's not like you can just turn it on. This isn't. Uh, this is where it differs from traditional SaaS, right? Traditional SaaS, you're buying Workday or Oracle Fusion. You deploy it within your organization, and hopefully it works, and it works for the entire organization if you've done it right. With the use cases on AI, each use case needs its own data set, needs its own workflows, needs its own configuration and training of the model and the people that will be using it. And so it becomes, it's not true SaaS to me. You're back in this era of custom design and development where every use case needs its own deployment, not just configuration. It's going to have to ingest data, create different rags, and deliberate implementation. So thinking of AI as another software implementation, I think, is the right framework to look at it. There's different elements to it, there's different methodologies, but at the end of the day, you're deploying technology. And all of those, baseline heavy lifting activities just don't go away because you're buying something AI.
There's always the risk with AI as well that for as fast as you can innovate, literally overnight, you can also fail just as fast. That's the risky part of it.
Yeah, it's not different than saying, I'm going to buy an ERP system off the shelf and put it on the servers, or get licenses and send a link tonight to everybody saying, use this.
Go live in 30
6
days.
days. Um, so what is governance? Like, I know you're deep into this. You do your own governance sessions with clients. To you, what is governance overall?
For me, especially in the local gov space, it's policy and compliance. And it feeds into well, it has to be inherent in your decision making. And it's one of these that, again, it's so easy to overlook this because it seems like it's so simple to solve. This can't be This doesn't require a lot of policy. But as we see with AI governance, this is something that you have to have governance on. You have to have everyone on the same page. You have to define outcomes. You have to track if I'm working towards that outcomes. When things shift, what am I going to do? Which direction am I going to go to address this? Because a lot of it boils down to, again, transparency and operating in the realm of public trust. And people need to see your decision making, and they need to see what guided you to use this in particular, and then how did you measure the success of
Hmm.
that. That's what governance means for me. Ultimately, it's risk control and use of resourcing correctly to get the result that I need and is expected. But it also provides you clarity. If something is really not meeting the mark and it's not really addressing something crucial the organization needs, you need to jettison that, because there's probably 20 other things that you can focus on, and be bringing into the governance to get you real tangible results. But to me, governance is where all of that really meets the road. That's where it all finally pulls together, and you actually have good strategic guidance, policy revisions, that are reflecting the advancement of the organization and the
All
tools.
right, so help me tactically on this then. When it comes to AI, how different is it? Is it different? And how different is it? Because we're, talking about decision rights, controls, evidence. What does governance look like? Is it a committee? Is it like, what do you recommend to your clients?
I think the biggest change is governance tends to be, especially in the IT sector, this tends to be a monthly committee meeting that gets together several times throughout the year, ideally monthly, although sometimes that's not the case. That is not going to work for AI. So you can look at governance very similar to the way you're already making, or the way you should be making technology decisions. But this has to be, in a lot of times, almost a daily discussion, especially as you're really diving into this initially. The advice I give clients is, you know your governance best. I can build you framework and I can show you a way to improve it, much like when we look at processes. I can't radically change a process in local gov, because there are considerations as to why certain steps have to be done, even though they don't make sense. So you have to have the balance of understanding what are you looking to get out of the process, with the fact of, here are some logical improvements. But what I recommend to clients is, you know how you currently make a lot of your decisions internally. So model that governance, but it needs to be at an accelerated pace. And don't be afraid to put together a committee of 2 or 3 people who every day visit this topic specifically, and provide the tactical guidance. And then you can have a strategic layer above that. You can still have an IT governance committee that you meet once a month, that this reports up into. But the only way this works tactically is, it has to be done in a timely manner. Decisions have to be made quickly. And a lot of times that's going to be a daily subgroup of 2 or 3 people that are allowing this to move forward at the correct pace, or at least be able to catch up.
Yeah, and the key point is, it's not a roadblock, right? You really need people that are in it to make this work, because governance sometimes just becomes a committee of no if you're not doing it right, if you don't have the right people on there, and if they're not empowered to actually move the needle forward on all the things you're trying to do, automation, efficiency. But that's not limited to AI, right? Anything. An IT governance committee, we've seen those become real roadblocks and committees of no, and nothing ever gets done. So that's the danger, always, of doing anything by committee. But the framework of governance, where you control decisions, implement controls, and make sure you can track it back with documentation and automated systems that can tell you what's going on, is remains critical. Uh, I'm gonna take a quick question or comment before we move on. Megan asks, I can read that. Compelling point stating staying current is no small task. Where's the question? Who truly owns responsibility of staying current? Is it the CIO, or has it evolved beyond a single role? And how are organizations successfully managing this today?
Yeah, the short answer is, it's
Yeah.
everyone, and that's the biggest struggle you have, because there are, even you have a public bias that's already inherent in there, that hopefully you've able to put some control around. Let me rephrase that differently. someone is always going to be looking for a reason to show up at a public meeting and poke holes in your decision making, especially with the use of AI. AI has, and you see this commonly in local government. People will use it privately and they think it's a great tool and they're probably using it in their private business, but they will show up at a public meeting and use the fact that you're using AI as a reason to really go after your policy or to try and poke holes in your decision or shoot down a decision, policy decision that they didn't want, but the governing body voted for and did, and now they want to say their piece. So they're going to use a variety of uh, tools and circumstances or misguided perceptions, is the nicest way I'll say it. Um, but they will pick and choose based upon how they're dealing with various people in the organization, and they will highlight the negative things about it. This really is what, to go back to my initial point with this, is going to make this so difficult. Is this isn't just 2 or 3 people in your organization championing it. This is a major culture shift that you have to control, and you have to be able to deal with that correctly. And honestly, if the organization is really not ready for certain aspects of this, then do not explore it. You're going to have to find a different way, because if there is just only 4 or 5 or 6 people that are really bought into this and the rest of your organization is not, this is not, they're not going to be suddenly convinced overnight to jump on board with this. So it's cultural. And the way I talk about it, you really need to train people. People have inherent fears, mostly because they don't know what they don't know towards products like this. And your best solution to bring them on board is to train them as to what this actually means. And even using a framework like this to teach them is a great way to show them how this actually works. So education and training is going to be the number one thing you're going to need to do right out of the gate. And there's a lot of folks out there that have never even tackled that particular aspect of it in their leadership in the organization. But you're going to have to, because it lays the foundation to actually make this successful. Otherwise, like I said, you can innovate fast, but you can fail just as fast with solutions like this.
Right. And so next, let's go into the NIST framework, right? We've been working with the NIST framework for many years, and there's now a new layer that they've uh, put out on AI that talks about how do you map use cases, measure success, manage this, and govern it. And it sort of ties into all the other aspects. Again, nothing different than what we've already talked about, but there's a framework out there. And what the way we use this is when we're doing IT assessments or strategic planning or AI maturity assessments, this becomes a really good framework for us to look at the organization and see where they land today in terms of their readiness to adopt um, uh, AI functionalities. So, what's been your take on those new frameworks?
So Measure is still the most difficult one for our local gov clients, because traditional ways of measuring things in actually in any investment that the organization makes has always been very tricky, because a lot of times it can be tied to a single palpable outcome of increased citizen engagement, or it's a mayor who wants to message a particular thing to the organization as well as the citizenry. Um, you can't tie this down to numbers, and you cannot, in a lot of cases, tie this down to this exact outcome, and that when we reach this, we've reached what our goal is. So you don't have to rethink this. Apply the way you look at measuring outcomes and you deal with policy decisions already, and then apply it to this framework. Because if you fall down the typical road of just using key metrics to determine success of this, it's going to fail just like it would if you tried to apply that to a policy situation or public relations situations in local gov. And most local gov situations are policy and public relations decisions.
So, how do you make this practical? There's the theory behind all of these things, and then you have IT directors, CIOs going, I just want the efficiency. You're making me do all of this work before I can even try a product or pilot it. What's the point? How do you make this not exclusive to actually trying? You should be able to try things. You should be able to pilot projects. How do you do that in tandem? Is it someone else's job to take care of the frameworks and the governance and the measurement, or is the CIO IT director responsible?
So, a great question. And one of the things that the NIST framework makes you think about is your risk tolerance, both as an organization and as well as a leader. Are you risk taking or are you risk averse? You're going to have to assume that you're going to dive into this, and you're going to have to assume a certain portion of what you're exploring is going to wind up being for nothing or not providing the result that you need. If you constantly seek perfection out of the solution and you wait to only deploy things that reach perfection, you will be so far behind the curve. So you have to get comfortable with your own and with your own organization's willingness to tolerate risk. The classic answer, of course, is tie it back to strategic planning that you have for your city or your county, or the goals that your governing board is looking to do, or what you have in your IT strategic plan, or what other parts of the organization have in their strategic planning. You're going to have to find a way to figure out what that balance is going to work for you. I need to have results in 60 to 70% of the efforts that we put into this, but I'm going to accept that some of these things that we're running down because we want to be able to react quickly and run them down and not bog it down might not lead to anything. They might lead to a tool that is cool and looks nice and is a real shiny distraction, but it doesn't actually improve anything. It doesn't improve a process. It doesn't improve service delivery. It doesn't even give your employees the tools that they actually need to do things better. You're going to have to get comfortable with how much of that are you going to write off, which is what allows you to innovate a little bit quicker on the cutting edge, versus if I'm going to be very, very safe on everything and this has to work 100% perfectly, you're going to set yourself up for failure, because it's going to take you so long to deploy these tools and actually see results out of them that it's going to lose its purpose and its need on top of it. I think that's the biggest thing you have to get comfortable with this, is what your risk profile is, especially as an organization. And a lot of people don't know what that is. They haven't quantified and qualified that.
Yeah, and that also ties into the maturity level, right? We've put out some white papers on how to find how mature your organization is. Uh, are you ready to take on some AI projects? So where do you begin? And in fact, I'm going to put some resources on the screen here for download. The first one is a Municipal CIO's Guide to Responsible AI. Um, Really cool white paper we released a couple of weeks ago that talks about everything we're talking about today in great detail, and has some really useful tools on how you can get started, how you can measure. Um, and then later on, we will share the maturity assessment framework. So, links on the screen, snap the QR so you can get the link to it, or reach out or chat with us in the comment box and we'll send you a link. Moving on, Robert. The next thing is, okay, governance again. Uh, how do you build the operating model for governance? You've talked about the committee, but what happens then? This is what I was trying to get to. How is this practical? How do you make it practical? Because yeah, the committee will meet every month or every 2 weeks and talk about things. But what's the action part of it, right? Because end users are already using tools. They're using free GPT. They're invariably putting information that shouldn't go into these models out there. And there's a constant pressure on asking for new products. Hey, I saw something yesterday. I got an ad for X, Y, and Z that could make our lives better or my life better. What's the intake process? How do you request? I know there's no one answer, but what's the general direction that our audience should be focused on or pointed towards?
Yeah, really focus on having a strategic team and a tactical team. Like we talked about before, a strategic team that meets on a regular basis, has a lot of the key players, process owners in a lot of cases. We try not to get committees to be too large. It becomes difficult to do, but you do want to have certain key process owners involved in that sort of governance. But at the same time, you have to have the smaller tactical committee that meets on a daily basis. That, if nothing else, they are your front line in identifying risks and determining this is a stop issue right here. We have to stop this. We need to pull this product back. That needs to be revised. Whatever we need to do, because there is an inherent risk here that has just popped up or that we just saw and we need to do. You're never going to get that out of a regular committee. It really has to be a tactical team. And again, it's going to be, look at who the ones who are the innovators and the champions in your organization, but are also day-to-day decision makers. It can be a CIO, and it can be the head of HR, and it can be a process owner. It could be two people from IT. Whatever it needs to be for folks who can look at things very quickly and assess and guide and move things towards strategic direction is going to be your best way to staying on top of this particular model. Because as we keep saying, this just moves at too fast of a pace. And you're exactly correct. The first thing is, if you don't really have an idea or an understanding as to where your organization is currently using AI tools, you need to figure that out. And then you also need to treat that as the tip of the iceberg, because there are, for everything that you do see, there are 20 instances behind the scenes that someone's doing where they're dumping PII into an app that they're using on their phone. And you need to get the messaging out. I think that's the biggest thing, is for the overall guidance and strategic planning to work, is messaging and education of everyone across the organization, and then allows these two tactical and strategic teams to work correctly.
Right. So then that brings me to another term that's dear to us, right? Project management and accountability. So the RACI matrix is going to be important. So this is just a sample, right? Have something that, as you're trying to make the governance flow and stick and become more useful, you need to know who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed on the decisions you're making or how this is going. Um, and that ties into, what you talked about, understanding risk and really knowing where you stand in terms of your maturity profile, because you can't take on uh, you can't implement an army of 200 agents to do the work for you if you're at tier one. And it's a good time for me to put up that QR code for the AI maturity assessment. um, this is something that we've come up with. We've used it for our clients. It just shows you the 5 levels of AI maturity and what you need to do to get through to level 5. And it'll tell you where you are today. And it'll also tell you how to get to the next level. It will tell you, if you're on level 1, what kind of things can you do with AI? What can you do with level 2? Really cool tool. Good. Please check it out. Um, so yeah, so RACI responsibilities, accountabilities really need to be assigned to people. That this is how you operationalize this beyond just governance and talking about it, right? And you can have tiers where you're chasing productivity and efficiencies in the tiers that you are mature enough to take on. Like, for example, at the lowest levels, you can be doing meeting summaries, draft emails. A lot of people are doing that because the tools are available, right? If you're a team shop, they make it available. Meeting note takers, you can have third-party meeting note takers, and all of that needs to be approved, by the way, by the use cases and the governance committees and whatever your policies are. Uh, but I think it's no longer okay to say we're not using AI at all. It is our policy to not use it. You, but you can't just open the doors. Start with governance, have a strategy, make sure you're ready, and then start releasing tools that make the organization run better, because the labor constraints haven't gone away. This is a super awesome time to take advantage of something cool that will alleviate those problems for you.
Yeah, you can't be aspirational either. You have to, you can to some degree, but you really have to get comfortable with your risk profile and then understand where exactly you are, not where you want to be. Where are you today in terms of adoption and readiness for this? A lot of people, especially those who are very innovative, maybe they're brought into an organization and they're very skilled at this, or they had success at their last place and now they're being brought into this organization that really is not open and ready for any of this. If you make things too aspirational, you're going to lose your audience. You have to start with understanding where exactly you are today. It's like a lot of the project work we look at. I need to know what the current state is, because the only way I can evolve us from the current state is by understanding exactly where we are and where we need to go. A lot of places look at, and we 2 or 3 years ago, we saw this extreme polarity. We either had folks saying AI not allowed at all under any circumstances. Policy says, you can be terminated if you're caught using AI tools. And then we saw this other extreme. A new deputy county manager or county manager comes in and mandates everyone will use AI. And then when you dive in there and you start seeing how people are using it, they're using it just to appease the county manager. It's not actually doing, or in some cases, they're doing double the work. They're using their traditional system and their traditional methodology. And every so often they throw something into AI so that they can tell their boss, hey, I used AI this week. And both of those come from misunderstanding where exactly you are in terms of readiness and adoption, and owning that and living in that state and understanding what that is first before you try and push your organization to the next
Well,
level.
in we've seen this in ERP deployments, right? There's always that one person that will want to triple check what your $2 million ERP system's doing using Excel. You're like, cool
Yep.
report. I'm going to use my Excel sheet to find out if it's accurate. I don't. It's going to take a while to go away.
Yep.
All right, moving on. The measure piece you talked about, testing before deploying. There's several testing checklists and pre-launch protocols. Especially handling privacy is really, really going to be important, especially when you talk about use cases like health and human services, housing departments, housing authorities. Privacy audits and privacy security is extremely, extremely important because, like I said earlier, if you let an AI tool that is smart and powerful roam your data systems, it's going to expose stuff that shouldn't be exposed to the public or even internally. Um, and then we've talked about security. That's important. Pen testing, vulnerability scans. These are just some tools that have again been around for decades, right? Just because it's now an AI deployment doesn't mean you ignore those. And in my live stream yesterday, I talked about how cybersecurity was the number one uh, priority for CIOs, the NIST CIO survey, for the last 12 years. And then this year it is AI, but cybersecurity is still second. It should be tied at first, if I'm concerned, right? Because you're not going to get any better if you don't do cybersecurity right. You're not going to be able to take advantage of AI. It may get worse if your security posture is bad.
No, and I think one thing a lot of people ignore is when they're jumping into AI initiatives, check your cybersecurity insurance policy, because you're going to be surprised at what is now being put into those policies regarding AI. And it's like in a lot of ways where policies were not generically written, but they pretty much would cover almost any circumstance. And then 5 or 6 years ago, they got tired of paying out so much. And so they started to put requirements in there that you demonstrate that you are doing recurring patching every 30 days or less, and that you test your backups, and that you actually have a policy and procedure for disaster recovery. They're going to do the same thing with AI. And you have to take a look at that, because worst case, which could come true, is you have a major incident, especially something that's AI generated, or somehow be tied back to the use of AI, and they're not going to pay out on a claim.
Yeah.
And that's finding out after the fact that they're not going to cover that claim. Do your due diligence and checking on those things on a regular basis. Even just making sure your core cybersecurity documents reflect the use of AI within your organization or where you want to go. So just because we talk about these aspects of it as well, especially for IT leaders, you really have to look at all the traditional things that you've been doing for cybersecurity and make sure you're working AI into that.
Yeah, and that brings me to a question. That sounds like a lot of management. IT departments are already overburdened with managing infrastructure, software, cybersecurity, people, help desk. You're talking about a whole new function here, right? I mean, it's got similar elements where they can be housed under specific management teams, but it is a new function. It needs continuous monitoring. Incident response becomes different than when it is just another cyber event, compromised password, ransomware, or does it, right? Because what is an incident when AI is involved? It could it could be undetectable with currently available tools. Uh, who's got the authority to stop? How do you do it? And how do you control vendors? Because you're not going to be able to scale internally. This will take a lot of work and manpower to deploy AI, build your own products, and deploy them internally. So you should be looking at external partners to take advantage of their existing products. But again, it is a new deployment. I don't think there's such a thing as enterprise AI SaaS. and I'm going to get pushback. I'm going to get calls after this. But yeah, the big players, Oracle, SAP, Workday, they're baking AI into their product. That's different. What I'm talking about is when you find a chatbot vendor at a conference and you have a 30 department county, it's not one product. It may be one product. You're deploying it 30 different times, 30 different implementations. And I've had discussions with the vendors about this. Yeah, the product is vanilla, but to make it useful, you're going to have to deploy it intentionally across different departments. Tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, or call me later. But that's my take on this. Um, so yeah, management is going to be huge. What else comes to mind, Robert, before we wrap up here in 10 minutes?
To your last point, this is no different than how we looked at systems 20 or 30 years ago. Everyone had the same concerns that, what is it going to controls in finance? People got really nervous with computers because they thought controls would go by the wayside, and that, well, if this person might have access into everything in the system. That there's an education aspect of this, as well as looking at this with traditional pillars of security and messaging in a lot of ways too, that has been very common in IT for quite a long time, or like you should be doing. So I caution people, don't overthink this. You're already doing this, or you should be doing this in a number of areas. Don't try and reinvent the wheel on this. That's where the education piece comes in, and CIOs need to get comfortable with their level of understanding on this. And if you need to go seek out some coursework to get you certified in something, just anything you need to do education wise, you need to bring in someone to the organization temporarily to help guide that. You really need to identify what that is. And you should not fear that, in that, well, I haven't kept up with it, or I'm in local government, things are siloed, so it's not going to affect us. You're going to have to get educated on that. And if you're really not comfortable with it, and I think a lot of CIOs are not, you need to tackle what you don't know. And that doesn't have to be daunting either. There's a lot of ways to get up to speed on this. What we're doing here is one of them. But you need to get really comfortable with what you don't know either, and be able to plug those gaps.
So you used to be a CIO many moons ago. If you were a state, city, county CIO today, how would you handle this? Let's say you've got a 20-year-old ERP system, you've got a pretty decent IT organization, infrastructure's pretty good. What would be, Robert, the CIO's AI adoption methodology?
So when something like this is coming at you and you've already got 25 things on your plate, the first thing in your mind is, how can I get the pressure off my back and deploy something that addresses this, but isn't going to take up a lot of my time? And that's the typical, unfortunately, reactive mode a lot of us in IT have been in from time to time, when there's a tsunami of things coming your way and you're in the middle of an ERP replacement already, right? And so it's like, this is not the time. I need to concentrate on these things. I'm already down 3 positions that I haven't been able to hire for, or governing body has said we're pausing filling these positions for 2 or 3 years. The first thing you do is you look at this and go, how am I possibly going to integrate this into what I'm doing, given all these other priorities? And I'll tell you what the wake-up call would be for me is, it's already happening. Your end users are already using this. They're already setting the policy on their own. They're already putting PII into areas that you can't control, or you have no idea what this is. This is a growing, festering issue that you have to tackle just as much as you would cybersecurity. And the polling you were talking about shows that people are starting to understand, through negative interactions with AI, of, I need to solve this. I can't let this wait. I need to focus and prioritize this. And if I do have to step in and go, I'm sorry, we're reprioritizing what we're doing in IT for the next year and a half, and this one is now coming up to number 2 or number 1 on the list, that's what you need to do. The risk is inherently difficult to mitigate if you don't even know where you currently stand. That's why the house is already on fire, right? Just because your room's not on fire yet doesn't mean that there's nothing happening. So I would look at it from those 2 perspectives. And I know a lot of our IT friends out there are thinking the same thing, of yet another thing that's coming my way. You have to tackle this. You have to deal with this. And if you need to get some temporary help to pull this together, please do that, because this is just as much of a risk as cybersecurity.
So what's the one thing, right? We're about to get into budget season for most government organizations. What's the one thing they should budget for if there's only one thing they can?
They need to understand where their AI readiness posture is in the organization and everything that's involved with that. Do we know where our data is? Do we even know where we want to go with a lot of these things? Do we even know if anyone in the organization is seriously using AI in their daily work? You have to get a full picture on that. You have to understand where you are. Like we say, current state discovery is so important in a lot of the projects we do, because that's where you get the foundational understanding as to the picture where the organization is. Until you have that picture and you see where everything is, or where everything possibly is, everything else is just guesswork. You're throwing darts in the dark and hoping that it finds the target, because if you're not aiming correctly, then you're not aligning resources correctly and efficiently, which is the most important thing in local gov right now, which is how do I maximize the amount of resources I'm given, which tend to be a lot smaller than they were in prior years. And especially now with funding being skittish, a lot of organizations are pulling back on that. Even more reason to be tactical in your focus as to how you're going to approach this. And you're not going to know unless you know what your readiness is and what the current landscape is within your organization.
All right, we need to wrap, but I'm gonna leave the audience with this. If you are ready to talk about these things for your organization, give us a call. We're on LinkedIn, on our website, or you can put your comment in here saying reach out to me, and we'd love to have a working session with you to talk about your posture on AI, your readiness, what you're doing, and how you're going to start tackling this. I'm not going to call it an issue. How are you going to start taking advantage of this issue meaningfully and mindfully and with intent, so it doesn't derail the rest of all of the hard work you've put into your organization, because that is the biggest risk here. Give us a shout, and we would love to help you out. But again, thank you for joining today. And I'm gonna put the QR code here again for the AI guide, the CIO's guide to responsible AI, and tell me what we got wrong there, or if you liked it, tell me that too. Uh, but again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Robert, parting thoughts? I'm sorry, I didn't ask you if you had any parting thoughts.
No, what I spoke about before is the most important thing. Is understanding where you are is key, and you don't want to wait. It's just like cybersecurity. You don't want to wait until an incident happens before you finally figure this out. You don't want to deal with the PR repercussions and the financial repercussions of something like that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us, and we will stay in touch. Thank you.